It is 4 p.m. on the East Coast, and U.S. markets are not where you would expect after what Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell announced a short time ago. The Dow, NASDAQ, and S&P 500 are closing, but it's mixed. Closing for the day mixed. Now, this after the Federal Reserve, led by Chairman Jerome Powell, lowered interest rates for the second time this year. The rates were cut by a quarter point. What would that mean for you? That important answer in a moment. But first, today, the House Judiciary Committee released documents alleging that former President Joe Biden's Justice Department and his FBI signed off on and conducted an investigation targeting more than 150 Republicans. Who is being looked into and why? House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan will be joining us. Plus, with just 6 days until Election Day, an old video has resurfaced of Democratic candidate for New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani. And this cannot be good for his campaign.
We have to make clear that when the boot of the NYPD is on your neck, it's been laced by the IDF.
That full video is coming up. Financial markets economist and president of the Lonsky Group, John Lonsky, joins me. Good evening, sir. And why were the markets mixed today when the bell closed just about a minute and 15 seconds ago? I would have expected on that news that they would have enjoyed the rate cut.
Well, the problem dealt with the press conference, Jerome's press conference following the rate cut. And in that press conference, Jerome Powell equivocated as far as the likelihood of another rate cut come the middle of December, or another rate cut by the end of this year. Now, believe it or not, a week ago, the credit market effectively assigned odds of 96% to another rate cut in December. After today's press conference, that implied probability fell all the way to 55%. And, lo and behold, despite this latest rate cut, the 10-year Treasury yield. The 10-year Treasury yield is important. It is a benchmark for your 30-year mortgage yield. That rose. It was under 4%, ended the day at 4.07%. In response to the reduced likelihood of a much lower mortgage yield, share prices of home builders sank by nearly 3% on average today.
Well, the market obviously is quite sensitive and listening to every word that Powell says. Let's go to the fact that the interest rate has been cut a bit, at least today. What does it mean for a mortgage? Because if you've got a mortgage now, and now it's going down 0.5% or 1/4 point, is you can't go out and refinance because you get all those points refinancing. It's so expensive. You're pretty much stuck, I oftentimes think, with what you have, unless you're buying a new house.
Yeah, as I said, bizarrely enough, the 10-year Treasury yield, the benchmark for the 30-year mortgage yield, actually rose today. So that means that thus far, this latest rate cut has not provided much relief to potential home buyers, nor to those homeowners that want to refinance an outstanding mortgage. And I can't help but mention this. The latest series of rate cuts began back in September of 2024. At that time, the benchmark 10-year Treasury yield was at 3.65%, which is a lot less than today's close of nearly 4.1%, and that is despite a 1.5 percentage point reduction in Fed funds from nearly, 5.4% down to today's 3.9%. It's a crazy world. Investors are still worried about inflation, and they're still troubled by this gargantuan federal budget deficit.
And is it that people, are they sort of waiting to see what happens in December? They're sort of on hold to December, or not? They're waiting to see.
And what they want to see is they want to see a continuation of meager jobs growth. The only reason why you've gotten rate cuts at the last two Fed meetings is because there was this unexpected drop in the pace of jobs creation. We only created 29,000 jobs per month in the 3 months ended. August, a healthy pace of jobs creation would be above 125,000. Now, the problem is that if we continue to have just the snail's pace rate of growth for employment, at some point that's going to feed into consumer spending. And once companies are hit with lower than expected sales to consumers, layoffs ought to follow.
You know, you always talk about job creation, but I've sort of paid attention. I'm not an economist, but I've always paid attention to a different number, and that's participation in the labor market, to see how many people who want to be in the labor market are actually in the market. And you know, that number has always sort of hovered around the 60s. I don't know where it is now, but isn't that an important indicator of the economy? People who want jobs can have jobs?
Yes, it is a very important indicator, and you would think that it would be especially worrisome if the labor force participation rate were rising significantly, yet at the same time, these people were not able to secure jobs, and that would lead to an increase in the unemployment rate. We still have a relatively low unemployment rate, you know, of 4.3%, but there's every reason to believe that we could get that rate lower without having to pay the price of significantly faster price inflation. You know, it's strange.
I'll tell you what scares me.
Go ahead.
I said what scares me about the job market sort of looking forward is that AI, artificial intelligence, is probably going to create a lot of jobs, but unfortunately it seems to be destroying more jobs at a faster pace than it's actually creating jobs, and it's destroying jobs sort of at the lower end of the pay scale. So, I think that that's going to be so disruptive, and I don't know where it's taking us.
Yeah, and AI is getting rid of a lot of jobs in information technology, programmers and the like, coders. They're losing their jobs. There are people in corporate finance that aren't needed anymore. You don't need as many entry-level workers to go ahead and tabulate all these numbers for higher-ups in a corporation. It's striking that the unemployment rate for Americans between 20 and 24 years of age is now above 9%. Not that long ago, it was around 7%. And you know, that tells us it's been a very difficult job market for college graduates who are looking for some entry-level profession, entry-level position for a professional type occupation.
John, nice to see you. I sort of thought that when we booked you today, it's going to be that we're going to have a day where we're like, you know, champion, like, you know, everything's going to look good in the economy. But you made me somewhat nervous anyway. John Lonsky, thank you.
I think Paul left everybody a little bit confused. Keep your eye on jobs growth. If that doesn't recover, then we're going to see slower consumer spending, and we will see more in terms of rate cuts, and eventually a deep decline by mortgage rates.
John Lonsky, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Why did North Korea do this? With President Trump about to be just a few miles away, North Korea test-fired cruise missiles into its western waters. This just one day before President Trump is to arrive in South Korea. President Trump, though, is brushing off the missile test, saying North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has been doing this for decades.
Oh, I don't know. He's been launching missiles for decades, right? It's another missile that was launched. I always had a very good relationship with him. So, you know, at some point I'll be meeting. The schedule is very tight, as you know, but at some point I look forward to meeting him again. I mean, our focus is now on tomorrow with China, and I want to make that the focus. But we'll come back and we'll, at some point in the not too distant future, meet with North Korea.
Meanwhile, just south of North Korea, President Trump is getting the royal treatment. Earlier today, President Trump arrived in South Korea. He was given a gift, a replica of an ancient Korean gold crown. The president was also awarded a gold medal. That medal represents South Korea's highest state honor. The medal is called Grand Order of Magunhwa. Here's President Trump receiving the medal.
That is really beautiful. I'd like to wear it right now.
Coming up, was the Biden Department of Justice spying on Republicans? If so, why? Chairman Jim Jordan is next when the record continues.
Charlie was the best of America, and the monster who attacked him was attacking our whole country.
Before Charlie Kirk died, he issued a stark warning of terrifying dangers ahead in a new book, Pagan Threat, authored by Pastor Lucas Miles. Charlie said Pagan Threat could save America and that you must read it. Get Pagan Threat free with Newsmax's special offer. Plus, get Dick Morse's new book, The Real Charlie Kirk. 2 great books with our free offer today.
Now it's a great time to play Solitaire Grand Harvest and enjoy a new world of solitaire. Brr, a cold world. This Christmas, discover all the holiday fun with exciting features from Santa, like our winter tournaments, festive mini-games, and challenging levels. Ever built a farm in the snow? 'Tis the season to turn classic into fantastic. So download Solitaire Grand Harvest for free and see for yourself.
Nobody wants to put a new roof over their head. It's too expensive. And if they can extend the life of that roof and get 5 more years or 10 more years, it's a no-brainer.
What Roofmax does is it helps people in that they don't have to spend that $15,000, $20,000 on a new roof. They can spend pennies on the dollar.
The Roofmax product was a small percentage of cost of replacing a roof.
This is a great financial decision for us as a community.
Hello, everyone. It's President Donald J. Trump, and it's Trump time. Check out this red beauty. It's one of my new watches. Wear it proudly on your wrist, and everyone will know exactly what it's for, who it represents. It's really going to be something special. It's for your favorite president. Get your watch today at gettrumpwatches.com. These make a great gift. It's Trump time.
The House Judiciary Committee just released new FBI files, and the content is going to rile more than 150 people because, according to these files, more than 150 Republicans may have been investigated by former President Joe Biden's FBI. The list includes President Trump's current White House Deputy Chief of Staff, Dan Scavino, his current White House Trade Advisor, Peter Navarro, and U.S. Pardon Attorney Ed Martin. These 3 listed in the files as Republicans who were potentially investigated, and this was part of a Biden administration investigation with the code name Arctic Frost. Who knew about this investigation? Some big names in the Biden administration. That's who? Former Attorney General Merrick Garland, ex-Assistant Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco, and former FBI Director Christopher Wray. They all signed off on the Arctic Frost probe in April of 2020. And then, 7 months later, in November 2022, the first one was 2022. In November of 2022, 7 months later, the investigation was handed over to Special Counsel Jack Smith. He was appointed by then Attorney General Merrick Garland. So today, with the news of the release of the files, President Trump took to Truth Social. He wrote, quote, "These thugs should all be investigated and put in prison. A disgrace to humanity. Deranged Jack Smith is a criminal," end quote. Chairman of the House Judiciary Committee that released those files, Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan, joins me. Good evening, sir. And do you have all the FBI files on this?
Well, we hope, but we're going to continue to work with Director Patel and get every piece of information we can. God bless, Cash and of course, Pam Bondi, because they've been it's night and day difference between them and what we have with Merrick Garland and Christopher Wray. But I think the big takeaway here is how much broader and more expansive this was. It wasn't just that they took the phone of a sitting member of Congress when they took Scott Perry's phone. It wasn't just that they spied on 8 United States senators. Now we learn it's over 150 individuals, key people in the Trump administration, key people that they went after getting communications, phone records, bank records, all kinds of things they were going after. This is how expansive Arctic Frost started out and how it even expanded even more when Jack Smith was named special counsel and when he took over the investigation. And finally, I would say this, Greta, this is why we want to talk to Jack Smith, why we've asked him to come in for a deposition as soon as possible. We got to ask him questions because we've already deposed 2 of his deputies, and they took the 5th 71 and 73 times. Mr. Bratt and Mr. Wyndham exercised their 5th Amendment liberties, wouldn't answer questions like, was this all political? Were you going after this to undermine and hurt President Trump in a political way? How about any other people you surveilled or spied on that, in addition to the 8 United States senators? Both of those questions they wouldn't answer. So we want to talk to Jack Smith, the guy who ran the investigation, find out what kind of answers he'll give us.
When they went after all these records of these people, did they have a warrant? Did they get one from the grand jury or a signed warrant from a judge? Did they have a warrant, or were they just being cowboys and going through these people, these records of the targets?
Again, questions we'll ask. I think they did have a warrant. I think they moved that way, but we want to figure all this out. We knew that Jack Smith had, put the gag order on President Trump. We knew he had raided Mar-a-Lago. We knew that one of Jack Smith's deputies confronted a lawyer for one of the defendants, and it looked like he offered him, it was kind of almost a bribe situation. He said, "We thought you were interested in this judge position. We didn't know you were a Trump guy." Kind of hint, hint, wink, wink, when they talked to Stanley Woodward. So there's all this that went on, but the big takeaways for me are 8 United States senators, a sitting member of Congress they took the phone of, and 2 of his deputies who we've already deposed who wouldn't answer our questions. So that's why we want to talk to Jack Smith and get the answers to all this.
When you look at the breadth of investigation like this, with over 150, or even if you go to the lower number that you just listed, is that they didn't indict or charge any of these people. So you get sort of the idea that they were just looking for everything, every place. What could possibly be a legitimate reason if they didn't strike gold on anybody?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think this was political. I think this was the left saying, we're going to go after these people. We're going to use this whole alternate elector reason as the basis for why we're doing this investigation. We saw the one email, but it looked like between an agent and a source, talking about former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows was involved in some kind of treasonous activity, which was just ridiculous. So this was the mindset. I think it also gets to that. Who are these folks in the FBI who are putting these emails together saying that there's reason to believe that the Chief of Staff to the President of the United States was engaged in treasonous behavior? That's just ridiculous. But that's what the email said, and it makes no sense.
Yeah. I hate that when they use reason to believe. Okay, the documents that you relieve have a lot of black spots on them, a lot of redactions. Is that something you did or the FBI did? And the reason it matters is because you really can't read those documents unless, for full transparency, why is everything being kept a secret, basically? There's no, if we want to uncover what happened, to give it, to find out if anything dirty was done, we really need to be able to read everything, and nobody should be running for cover with doing redactions.
We didn't put the redactions on. That's how they came from the Justice Department. You're right. We need to be able to read it all in full context. But I would go a step further and say the names under there, I actually want to ask them questions. I want to find out, who's this source giving this? Look, to me, when I read it, it looks like under the redaction it'd be the source and then the agent who's getting the information. I want to know who that source is. I want to know who that agent is saying these ridiculous things that get put in an email and sent to someone else as part of this investigation. So I think it's even more than that, not just what those names are. I want to talk to those people. I want to ask them questions. So that's where I think we try to go next.
Well, that's the starter. The starter is to find out who they are. Were the redactions done during the Trump administration or during the Biden administration or the Trump administration? And who is it? Someone up in some room with a big black marker someplace? Who's doing these things?
Well, I think that's standard practice at the Justice Department, at the FBI.
Which is not good. That is not good.
And I don't know which one. I don't know which FBI did it. My gut tells me it was probably that's how the documents were in the Ray FBI that Director Patel has gotten his hands on now and giving to us. But I don't know that, but that'd be my guess. But my understanding is that's just standard names, phone numbers of agents, phone numbers of sources, names of sources. That's just standard how they do it. But we want to know now because we saw how broad and how expansive this is. We want to know who those people are so we can ask them questions.
Well, if you're that involved in an investigation, especially a government person, you ought to have your name not blackened out so that we can see who it is, we can see who's doing what. I get it if it's a confidential source, it's going to get shot on the street or something if we reveal it.
Right.
But the fact that I'm always told that's the way it's done. Well, that's never satified me because that usually means it's sort of like why things are classified in this town because that's the way it's done. But that's where the lack of transparency, and we could get to the end of this very quickly if we could read everything and see it. And even if they turned it over to you unredacted, it would be good. I realize maybe you won't turn it to the public, but I don't know how you do an investigation when you can't get all the material.
Well, we're working on finding out what the name is underneath those black lines. We want to know who the name is, or what the name is. We want to know who that individual is. So again, we can ask them questions like where did I think particularly the email I keep citing. I want to know who that source is because I think it's the source that they were using. who was the person alleging that the former chief of staff was engaged? That's just the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
Well, you know what, though? But it's a little bit like when they were using that guy Steele as a source. They kept using it, wouldn't tell. But if anyone had investigated Steele, you wouldn't have used him as a source.
Yep.
You know, but
Right.
if you say the person's a source and black it out, there's no way to challenge whether it's someone who has good information or it's someone who's got an axe to grind or whatever. You know, but that's
point.
where
And
I go back.
And not to mention the sub-sources that Steele was using, who just further complicates it, means there's more lies in that ridiculous dossier that they relied on to get warrants to go spy on a presidential campaign. No, great point. And it's, again, this all now has come, all getting exposed. It goes clear back to 2016 when they spied on, that's when it all started, and we're starting to unravel it all so that, and the reason we want to unravel it all and hold people accountable is so that it doesn't happen again.
Well, if I were a government employee or anybody, and I found out that they were doing that to me without a warrant from a judge or from a grand jury, I would sue from a constitutional rights being violated. Because I tell you one thing: first of all, you get a big chunk of change out of the government. Secondly, you get a lot of discovery, you get a lot of information. You know, and we'd find out what the government is doing and not doing. Chairman Jim Jordan, thank you, sir.
You bet, Greta. Thank you.
Coming up, is the Israeli-Hamas peace deal on or off? The latest news when the record continues.
Drop is finally here. Drop delivers the weight loss benefits of GLP-1 injections in easy-to-use oral drops, no needles.
That's right. The two big drawbacks with weight loss injections are high costs and weekly injections. Drop is flavorless and odorless, so you can just add it to water or your favorite beverage. Drop offers other advantages over injections too. With Drop, you can personalize your dosage based on your weight loss goals.
And because you add Drop to any liquid, there's no concern about injection site infections, bruising, or dosage confusion.
Drop is the easier, safer, cost-effective alternative to help you achieve your weight loss goals without the needles.
Can't find it anywhere? The Wellness Company has it. No consultation needed. Simply order online and use promo code SLIM to save $100. Visit dropthepounds.com/slim. That's promo code SLIM at dropthepounds.com/slim.
A peace plan for Gaza. For the plan to advance, Hamas must disarm. Instead,
Tonight, terrifying images emerging from Gaza. Videos show Hamas-linked gunmen carrying out a public execution as they return to the streets.
Hamas on a rampage, executing Palestinians, bloody crackdown, spreading terror. For freedom, not terror, Hamas must go.
Eric was injured in Iraq. I called Wounded Warrior Project and I said, we need help. They don't leave anybody behind.
I want the whole world to be able to meet Corey because he is someone that has never given up.
Since I first appealed to you on behalf of our wounded service members, the need for Wounded Warrior Project has gotten even greater, and that need will continue to grow for many years to come. That's why I'm asking for your support. With a gift of just $19 a month, you can join Wounded Warrior Project.
They walked in and said, "What can we do for you? What do you need? Anything."
I know firsthand how many lives they've saved, how many people are still here today because of Wounded Warrior Project.
I felt all alone. There was a voicemail on my phone and it said, "Jeremiah, this is Megan with Wounded Warrior Project. I need you to give me a call."
Injured veterans reach out to Wounded Warrior Project every day, looking for life-changing care. Many warriors are more isolated than ever. Wounded Warrior Project is committed to adapting our free programs so that these brave men and women continue to get the critical support and services they need.
Wounded Warrior Project is so important and they help so many.
To those who donate, thank you very much. The programs that have been started have accomplished a great deal.
Please call or go online with your gift of $19 a month, and we'll send you this limited edition blanket honoring the 250th anniversary of American independence and freedom.
You are the reason why thousands of warriors across the country are living a better life. Thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you.
Please call or go online right now.
The ceasefire is back on, at least for now, but it does continue to look very fragile. It is back on after yesterday when Israel launched heavy strikes in Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered the military strikes. He says Hamas terrorists breached the truce. Also this week, IDF troops came under fire in Gaza. An Israeli soldier was killed. Middle East correspondent Zach Anders is in Tel Aviv, where it is 10:25 p.m. local time. Zach?
Yeah, Greta, last night we were talking about the situation in southern Gaza involving IDF troops coming under fire. I had said that it was very serious. We weren't allowed to share at the time, but it is, since the family has now been informed, of course, and we can now share that an IDF soldier was killed. This, as the IDF says, a 37-year-old father of 5, a reservist soldier, was killed by sniper fire in Rafah. It led to an RPG, or an RPG was fired after that, led to a gun battle with the IDF and these armed gunmen that we don't know for certain if they're Hamas, but given the circumstances, considering that this is an armed militant group of Hamas allegiance. Now, in this Israeli-controlled area past the yellow line, this is where that battle took place, where this soldier was killed. He was laid to rest in Jerusalem today, and his death comes during this challenging period for the fragile peace agreement. Now, as Prime Minister ordered powerful strikes in response, and we saw those within hours of the event. Israel launching retaliatory airstrikes throughout Gaza late last night into the morning hours. The Hamas-run health agency in Gaza states 104 people were killed, including children. We have reviewed images of dead children being brought to nearby hospitals in Gaza. Now, the IDF states that dozens of terror operatives were targeted in these strikes. President Trump on Air Force One responding to these overnight strikes. Take a listen.
Nothing's going to jeopardize. You have to understand, Hamas is a very small part of peace in the Middle East, and they have to behave. They killed an Israeli soldier, so the Israelis hit back, and they should hit back.
And the destruction from these strikes seen in the daylight hours as Gazans hold funerals for their dead. And meanwhile, the Qataris, they're seen largely as the linchpin to getting Hamas to abide to this peace deal. They have now blamed Hamas as well. Qatar's leader admitting today that Hamas did violate the ceasefire. The Qatari Prime Minister, speaking from the Council on Foreign Relations conference in New York earlier this afternoon, did share his disappointment.
Yesterday's event was honestly something that very disappointing and frustrating for us to see that it's happening. And we were trying to contain it, and we mobilized right away after this and in full coordination with the United States. And we have seen that the U.S. also is committed to the deal.
Now, of course, our sources in Jerusalem around the Prime Minister reminding us tonight that Israel is pursuing the president's peace plan in good faith, while the Prime Minister's office once again demanding today the remaining 13 bodies of Israeli hostages held by Hamas be returned immediately. Greta?
Zach, one of the conditions on this 20-point plan is that Hamas give up its weapons. Do you see any indication or any movement towards Hamas giving up its weapons?
Not at this point. And this is a situation, too, where we see the opening of the Rafah crossing between Egypt and Gaza, and that's allowing for these trucks to come in from the Egyptian side. Not the same screening process as before. Now, to say that weapons are flowing in right now through those trucks like they did before would be an assertion without any fact available. But we're seeing some remarkable product sales inside the Gaza Strip now that this has opened up. iPhone 17s are available in the marketplaces. Those are phones that just came out, a month ago now. And so if those goods are making its way in, you have to wonder what else is making its way in to Hamas, which is still being financed, as we've been told by the Israelis many times, still getting its money from Iran and those different terror proxies.
Zach Anders, thank you. And Russia is again flexing its military might with some very dangerous weapons, and it's their second time this week. This time, Vladimir Putin says Russia tested a super torpedo that can be armed with a nuclear bomb. The Kremlin released this animated video of the torpedo. Russia has named the torpedo the Poseidon. However, some experts have named it something else, and something very ominous, the Doomsday Machine. Russian state media says the Poseidon torpedo can trigger a radioactive tsunami up to 1,600 feet high. That is higher than the Empire State Building in New York. Of course, the United States has not yet publicly verified, and our information about the torpedo is from the Russians. Putin says the torpedo was test launched on Tuesday from a submarine. He called it, quote, a huge success. Coming up, which Rupert Murdoch media property got punked? That when the record continues.
I am Mr. H, owner of Immuno 150, possibly the most complete and best nutritional supplement in the world, bar none. Now, it has propelled me to 91 years of age and my wife Shirley to 82. Both of us are still cutting a wide swath in life, doing everything we did many years ago. All because of Immuno 150, and it can do the very same thing for you. Try it for 90 days so you can experience the difference it can make in your life. Nothing on the market can compete with the way we blend 70 plant-derived colloidal minerals with 80 very carefully selected nutrients. You'll be surprised if you take the recommended dose of Immuno 150 for 3 months. Place your order now so that you can be with us many years from now. Thank you and God bless.
Derriere, caboose, booty, badunkadunk. No matter what you call it, if you have hemorrhoids, your tushy is no laughing matter. So don't use a cream that treats your rear end like a joke. Get serious relief with Recticare Advanced Hemorrhoidal Cream. Recticare Advanced is seriously effective with 2 powerful medicines for rapid dual-action relief, soothing the uncomfortable swelling, itching, and pain of your hemorrhoids. For serious hemorrhoid relief for your buns, get Recticare Advanced.
Do you have a yo-yo smile? Sometimes yellow, sometimes white. It's a constant battle between everyday stains and whitening treatments. Until now, get Smile Actives, the daily teeth whitening breakthrough that gives you a more youthful smile and helps you keep it.
At 43 years old, I don't mess around with products that waste my time. Smile Actives is easy, and it works. No gloopy trays, no messy strips. Just add a little bit on top of your toothpaste when you brush your teeth. And ta-da, white teeth.
Just add Smile Actives to your favorite toothpaste and watch the magic happen. Our patented Polyclean microfoam lifts away deep stains for a dramatically younger and whiter smile.
You have a choice. You can have those yellow teeth and just be old Nana or Pop-Pop, or you can be smiling and dazzling and full of confidence. I love my white teeth.
Scan, click, or call for your whitest smile yet. And if you order right now, we'll double your whitening free. Get an extra Smile Actives as our free gift to you, but only while supplies last.
I drink coffee every day. I started noticing that my teeth were not as bright as I like them to be, a little dingy. The Smile Active, it works. Got your boy gleaming.
100% of users saw whiter teeth. Smile Actives lifts away even the toughest stains from coffee, wine, and food, gently restoring your bright, youthful smile. Plus, it's safe for veneers, crowns, and dentures.
It's really a no-brainer if you want to whiten your teeth.
Clinically shown to brighten your teeth 5 shades whiter in just 7 days.
If you could use something so easy like Smile Actives to take yellow teeth to white teeth, why wouldn't you?
Act now. Get Smile Actives for just $24.95 and we'll double your order free. But hurry, this deal won't last. Smile Actives is guaranteed to work. Whiten your teeth or get your money back. No questions asked. Don't wait. Get Smile Actives for just $24.95 and we'll send you a second bottle absolutely free. That's free shipping. A free extra bottle. That's an incredible 58% savings. Scan the code, go to smileactives.com or call to get your beautiful whiter smile now.
The New York City mayoral race is heating up. It's a 3-way race. Democrat New York State Representative Zohran Mamdani, Democrat former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo running as an independent, and Republican founder and CEO of the Guardian Angels, Curtis Sliwa. Recent polls show Mamdani in the lead. A week from today, November 4th, is Election Day, and today Cuomo released this campaign ad.
Life in New York is tough right now. Candidates who need on-the-job training can't fix it. I see a new day just over the horizon, with 5,000 more cops on the beat, the homeless off the streets, and 500,000 new affordable homes, bringing New Yorkers together by unifying, not dividing. Join me, and let's build a better New York starting on day one.
And yesterday, Sliwa released this campaign ad.
We're going to end the cash bail system once and for all. We're going to do it in New York, and we're going to do it this year.
Mamdani has not released a new political ad, but this video of him from August 2023 has resurfaced. Here's Mamdani at the 2023 Democratic Socialists of America's National Convention.
I think that for anyone to care about these issues, we have to make them hyperlocal. We have to make clear that when the boot of the NYPD is on your neck, it's been laced by the IDF. Right? We have to make, not specifically that example all the time, but just to say that for working class people who have very little time, who have so many stresses, who are under so many pressures, there isn't that much time for symbolism. We have to make it materially connected to their life. And I think that what opportunity we have is that we're in a country where those connections abound, especially in New York City. You have so many opportunities to make clear the ways in which that struggle over there is tied to capital's interest over here.
This New York mayoral race has gotten a lot of attention, but not just in the United States, but around the globe. Yesterday, the Times of London, that's owned by media mogul Rupert Murdoch, published what the paper claimed was an interview with former New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio. The Times of London billed it as an exclusive interview with de Blasio, but oops, it turned out the paper got punked. It was not de Blasio. The British newspaper was tricked by an unidentified person who was impersonating de Blasio. Shortly after the interview was published, de Blasio took to X to say, quote, "I want to be 100% clear. The story in the Times of London is entirely false and fabricated. It was just brought to my attention and I am appalled. I never spoke to that reporter, never said those things. Those quotes are not mine, do not reflect my views," end quote. Well, now the Times of London has deleted the interview with the imposter. Chairman of CPAC, Matt Schlapp, and former Special Assistant to President Biden and former Press Secretary to the First Lady, Michael LaRosa, join me. Michael, obviously, I mean, the mayoral race, I could see why everybody in New York is interested. I see, why everybody in the United States is interested. Why do you think it's getting such global attention?
Well, because I think it's unusual to have a candidate running for mayor of New York City sort of opposed to the capitalist system, which New York City, being the financial global hub of the world, is probably shocking to a lot of people, including a lot of Democrats. I just saw Congressman Swazi from Long Island just tweeted how he's a Democratic capitalist, not a Democratic socialist. He's voting for Andrew Cuomo. I'm guessing that the interest is partly because of that, but partly because of a lot of the things, the inflammatory things that this guy has said over the years that he's either had to walk back, apologize for, or come to sort of an agreement with the voters that he's not going to go there again, or something like that. That he's learned lessons, or that he's evolved and he's grown in his position.
I would just say this: the Muslim influence in London and in Paris is the political story. The illegal immigration, mostly Muslim throughout Europe, is the political dynamic that is changing everything.
Which is why the Prime Minister, I'm sorry to interrupt you, when the Prime Minister was so quick to say a two-state solution in the middle of the time when President Trump was trying to negotiate a settlement, which was very disruptive.
People didn't understand, why did Macron say what he said? Why did these UK officials say what they said? And the reason is they're playing for votes inside their own countries. And so the reason why this is so interesting to Europe is they're viewing Trump as kind of retaking these policies in America. Why then would New York City be embracing such a radicalized Dem? Like, look, Michael, it sounds like, is trying to get his party to be a little more reasonable, and he's highlighting Democrats who are not endorsing Mamdani. I wish you luck in what I view as a futile effort. But the whole world is watching to see if America catches this flu that is going throughout Europe, which is you had this unfettered immigration. You have this immigration that doesn't agree with the founding of your country, be it France, be it the UK, be it America. And how does that play out in electoral politics when their numbers get bigger and bigger and bigger?
You know, it always seems like we're far out from the midterms and from 2028. It seems like a million years from now. And it seems like certain parties have got a lock on it. You know, like the Republican Party's got the wind behind their sails. But then when the interest rate was cut just a quarter point and the markets were sort of mixed and flat about it, and you hear that we are not creating a lot of jobs, you know, they always say it's the economy. And so, you know, with all the stuff that's going on, is that Trump has got to be able to, you know, people who have money are doing really well, but he's, you know, but all the Republicans need to worry about the people at the lower end.
Yeah, look, I think we're going to be having a different conversation at this time next week, the day after the election in Virginia and New Jersey and New York City and California, which will have a big impact on the midterms, the voting referendum there, the redistricting referendum there. I think Democrats probably by this time next Wednesday are going to feel a lot of wind at their sails, probably some gloating, probably some more optimism than they've ever felt, or that they felt in the last year. until
Mamdani gets elected, if he does get elected, he's giving away everything. And as Margaret Thatcher said, sooner or later, run out of other people's money. They don't even have other people's money to run out of it.
Look, the economy is the number one thing. It's the number one thing for Republican voters. And look, there's a lot of AI disruption. You're reading about all these big tech companies that are laying people off. The Trump tax cuts, which were very important, this big, beautiful bill, but in the end, it was mostly just a continuation of the previous Trump policy. So it's critically important that Jay Powell not do anything to be, look, I'm the conservative here, but he's so conservative with these interest rates when all the indicators are that inflation has really been tamed in this country. He ought to let the economy hum, and that's why he's getting so much criticism.
You know, you talk about AI, about people losing jobs because of AI, the high tech. But I'm still stuck on the fact that when I used to go to the grocery store, and I've said a million times that there was a man at the booth who you'd pay your money to open the gate and you'd leave. Now there's nobody at the parking, and you go to the grocery store and we all self-check out. I mean, I don't see. I mean, these other jobs. I don't forget the high tech ones at AI companies. We're not. We know all these other jobs. Where are they?
You won't catch me at a grocery store. It's Amazon or Instacart or DoorDash.
But even if
I don't go.
But even if you go there, you do your own checkout. I mean,
right.
These jobs just seem to be vanishing right in front of us.
And we're playing into it. And I think it's look. I guess I'm the anti-union guy, but like when I go to checkout, I try to go to the person. Because I actually think this is a bad thing in the economy. You can go to Instacart, you can get all your groceries,
if you can
but they
find
give you all
person.
that bad produce. Like, I don't want that. If you like to cook, you want to cook with goods.
I don't like to cook.
Okay, so that's why you like that. But I like to pick good stuff so that you can make good stuff.
But at some stores, there isn't a person there
that's
because
right.
they're so automated.
And then you get to the next question,
all
which
the parking garages.
That's what I mean, the parking garages.
And have you ever been locked in a parking garage?
Yes.
I have, and you can't get anyone.
You should see my husband.
And have you ever had the
my
scanner stop working? I have, and you can't find anyone.
No, the best is
we're all late, and we're all miscommunicating because we're not looking at each other eye to eye and doing deals, right?
The best of all, at risk of divorce, is my husband struggling with pain at those electric parking lots.
I've watched John. It's he's not the most digitally cutting edge, but I'm right behind him. So
I know. I say. All right. So next Tuesday, who's going to be the governor of Virginia?
Probably Abby Spangenberger.
You agree?
She's ahead in every poll, so it's hard not to say she's going to win. Now, Winsome Sears says she's tied in her internal polling, so I do think all these races are narrowing. The question is, from my point of view, can they narrow quick enough?
Okay, so Youngkin was popular, though, right?
By this point, he was up single digits in the race 4 years ago.
In the last 4 years, hasn't he been a popular governor?
He has, but he's also... He also has been, I think, somewhat quiet. I don't think he's not the kind of person like Ron DeSantis or someone that commands news every day. I think he's done a very solid, methodical job.
Why do they go into the other party then?
The Northern Virginia suburbs are so populated, and they're filled with really bored, furloughed federal workers right now who are probably blaming Republicans in Congress, not Democrats, because they probably skewed Democrats.
Why do the Republicans get blamed for the shutdown?
Well, I don't know.
I don't know
if the end they are, but the electorate, the big voting chunk in Northern Virginia are to the left, and a lot of them are federal workers.
Look, this is
and therefore they will. I don't think the country.
Michael, this is you're not a Virginia guy, but this is the thing that makes.
I am now, as of a year ago.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay, good. Welcome aboard. This makes Virginia harder for Trump because he runs so aggressively against the swamp. And the swamp dwellers are my neighbors. And so there's an extra hostility for Trump. Now, the question is, Winsome Sears has kind of separated herself from Trump. She's not like running with Trump. But at the end of the day, it's a little bit of an issue. I'm glad Trump is taking on the swamp so aggressively, but it makes it that much harder to win in Virginia.
Well, that's a conversation for another day that we'll have to debate. But I will say it is.
You think he's popular in the swamp? Okay,
no,
Trump is popular in the swamp.
That he's taking on the swamp. I don't know about that. But what I would say is that it's interesting, and I think what put them in a bad position in Virginia is that Trump has not endorsed the Republican candidate, and that's got to hurt.
I do want to introduce Michael to this concept of Doge. Nothing scared the swamp more than Doge.
I'm going to introduce both of you to the end of the segment.
And you're allowed to interrupt me anytime it is your show.
Matt Schlapp, Michael LaRosa, thank you both very much. Coming up, someone is calling for senators to have a backbone. That when the record continues.
I was tired of sitting on the sidelines. Now, thanks to Jointivia, I'm back in the swing of things. Wait, $70 for a refill?
You gotta try Single Care. Just look up your prescription, show the coupon at the pharmacy, and save.
Really?
Really. Single Care crushes the cost of my prescription, almost as much as I'm crushing Chad.
Unbelievable.
See why more people are saving with Single Care. Common side effects include shockingly lower prices, excessive fist bumps, and humbling guys named Chad.
Hello, everyone. It's President Donald J. Trump, and it's Trump time. Check out this red beauty. It's one of my new watches. Wear it proudly on your wrist, and everyone will know exactly what it's for, who it represents. It's really going to be something special. It's for your favorite president. Get your watch today at gettrumpwatches.com. Please make a great gift. It's Trump time.
Consumer Cellular knows there are a lot of offers flying around, but they slip away too fast. We don't play games. What you see is what you get. Bet you're glad you wore cargo pants.
See how we can cut your bill. Call Consumer Cellular.
Make this Christmas the year you go all in on joy. At Balsam Hill, celebrate with one of our beautifully crafted lifelike trees. For a limited time during our anniversary sale, save up to 50% off and start making memories at balsamhill.com.
Are you or a loved one a military veteran that has been diagnosed with mesothelioma? Do you have questions about getting the best treatment or paying medical bills? Have you received the proper care and compensation you deserve? Let our firm serve you with the same dedication you served your country. We are exclusively devoted to helping those with mesothelioma. Call now to get this free book, and we'll answer any question you have. We'll even visit you.
Call 800-555-8958 or go to mesobook.com.
A peace plan for Gaza. For the plan to advance, Hamas must disarm. Instead,
Tonight, terrifying images emerging from Gaza. Videos show Hamas-linked gunmen carrying out a public execution as they return to the streets.
Hamas on a rampage, executing Palestinians, bloody crackdown, spreading terror. For freedom, not terror, Hamas must go.
Hi, I'm regional commercial actor Neil Patrick Harris. I love Rise Mushroom Coffee, and not just because I look good drinking it.
Hello there.
I also like the improved focus and all-day energy, plus it's easy on the stomach. That's because we use only the best organic mushrooms, like Stumpy Warthog, Bird in the Bushes, and Found a Hair in Marsupius, which sound like made-up names because they are. Rise Mushroom Coffee. Drink it cold or hot, like me.
Medications are expensive, especially the newer ones, and the Trump administration is working to cut costs of medications by making it easier to develop generic versions of biologic drugs. Biologic drugs, which I admit I had to look up to, are made from living cells like bacteria or animal cells. Some examples are vaccines, insulin, or the arthritis drug Humira. These are different from drugs like aspirin, which are made from chemicals. They can easily be mass-produced and copied in a lab. Since biologic drugs use living cells, they are more expensive and take more time to produce. Well, today, the Health and Human Services Department, which is led by Secretary RFK Jr., and the Food and Drug Administration, led by Dr. Marty Makary, announced their plan to lower drug costs.
These are complex medicines made, as I said, from living cells that treat cancer, autoimmune diseases, and rare disorders that affect millions of Americans. Biologics make up only 5% of our prescription, but they account for more than half of our drug spending.
There are low-cost alternatives to these expensive biologics. The good news is there are low-cost alternatives. Unfortunately, there are far fewer on the market than should be because of regulatory red tape hurdles. Today, the FDA is issuing draft guidance to eliminate the onerous requirement of comparative studies that have historically been associated with biosimilars and their approval. We don't have these additional requirements for generics. Moving forward, we're not going to have them for biosimilars. This reform will take the 5 to 8 year time frame to bring a biosimilar to market and cut it in half. It will also save companies about $100 million in their development costs.
The pain from the shutdown is increasing. Here is the leader of the Senate, Senate Majority Leader John Thune.
The rules, the procedures in the Senate by which we operate and are governed require a 60-vote threshold. So it takes more than 51, meaning, since we have 53 Republicans, it's going to take a handful of Democrats. Well, we've been able to generate 55 votes consistently now, 13 different times, for funding the government, opening up the government, but we need 5 more. So the question is, are there 5 people over there with a backbone, 5 courageous Democrats, 5 Democrats who don't buy this, who don't believe that they ought to be using the American people as leverage, try and win a political battle? Are there 5 Democrats over there who believe that we ought to do what's in the best interest of the American people, the best interests of the air traffic controllers and the TSA agents, and the men and women in uniform, and the SNAP recipients that starting on Saturday are going to go without food assistance?
As a reminder, it is now day 29 of the government shutdown. And as Senate Majority Leader John Thune mentioned, in just 3 days, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, known as SNAP, will shut down for roughly 42 million Americans, unless, of course, the government reopens. This is catastrophic for families who rely on these benefits to feed their families. I should also remind you, members of Congress whose job it is to fund our government are still receiving their paychecks, despite the shutdown. And Hurricane Melissa has done all she can to damage and devastate Jamaica, and she was unfortunately successful. Yesterday, the Category 5 hurricane made landfall and barreled through the Caribbean country and nearby Haiti. Melissa, though, is not finished. She is now heading towards the Bahamas. She has claimed more than 24 lives across the Caribbean islands, and according to the National Hurricane Center, Melissa is not forecasted to make landfall here in the United States. This weekend, she is projected to weaken and die down in the Atlantic. Coming up, an American classic becomes a global phenomenon. That when the record continues.
You hear the same voices. Donald Trump knows that's a lie. From the same people. Donald Trump is less lucid. Saying the same thing.
Insults, invective, and outright lies.
And you say, enough! I'm Chris Salcedo, and I'll tell you the real news. You don't believe me? Just tune in.
At Humana, we believe your health care should evolve with you. And part of that evolution means choosing the right Medicare plan for you. Humana can help. Hi. My name is Sam Davis, and I'm going to tell you about Medicare Advantage prescription drug plans that can provide more coverage than Original Medicare, including prescription drug coverage, all wrapped up into one convenient plan. With Original Medicare, you're covered for hospital stays and doctor office visits, but you have to meet a deductible for each, and then you're still responsible for 20% of the cost. Next, let's look at Medicare supplement plans. If a service is covered under Original Medicare, then a Medicare supplement plan pays for some or all of your Medicare deductibles and the 20% co-insurance. But they may have higher monthly premiums and no prescription drug coverage. Humana Medicare Advantage prescription drug plans include medical coverage, plus prescription drug coverage. with $0 copays on hundreds of prescriptions. All plans include $0 copays for covered preventive dental services, vision coverage that includes vision exams and a yearly allowance toward eyewear, and hearing benefits that include routine hearing exams and coverage toward hearing aids. You could get $0 copays for in-network preventive services like primary care visits, mammograms, and prostate exams, and there's worldwide coverage for emergency and urgent care when you travel. Plus, Humana also offers Medicare Advantage plans. Plans have $0 or low monthly plan premiums, and there's a cap on your out-of-pocket costs. To see if Humana plans are available in your area, simply call the number on your screen or visit our website. The Medicare annual enrollment period ends on December 7th, so call now. Humana, a more human way to healthcare.
People always ask, why Patriot Gold Group? With over 10,000 clients to date and over $1 billion in transactions, not a single complaint on the Better Business Bureau. Consumer Affairs top rated for 9 years in a row. Over 2,000 5-star reviews. The only company nationwide where you, the client, work directly with an owner. Home of the no fee for life IRA. Gold is up 80% in the last 28 months, 275% since Lehman Brothers collapsed. We are patriots protecting patriots. Give Patriot Gold Group a call at 888-528-4290 before it's too late. Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs' top-rated gold and silver dealer 9 years in a row. Call now, 888-528-4290.
Think you need a new roof? Think again and save thousands. We'll help you put off the high cost of a roof replacement for at least 5 years.
Or 10.
Or sometimes even 15.
We're America's most trusted roofer because we always try to save your roof rather than replace it.
We'll restore your roof for a fraction of the cost of a new one. But don't wait. If your roof loses too much protective coating, it's too late. Call now or scan the code and we'll give you an assessment of your roof for free.
As we mentioned earlier in the show, President Trump got the royal treatment in South Korea, but it was not just crowns and medals when he arrived, but one of his favorite songs. Unfortunately, the president did not dance today. He already had all that dancing, though, in Malaysia and Japan. The Chris Salcedo Show is up next. Have a great evening.